The seventh time she came to Ashfin Hold, she arrived with a bag smaller than my steward's hat. I noticed that detail from the high window of my study, the one that looks down on the eastern gate. I noticed it because I had been watching for her, which was its own problem, and because the smallness of the bag meant something I did not yet want to name. A woman who carries less each visit is a woman who does not expect to stay long. Her name was Marin. She was a traveling wolf tender from the border settlements, the kind of healer who moved between the small packs and the outlying holds, treating the wolves that the grand court physicians considered beneath them. Not a grand figure by any measure. She had no pack affiliation, no title, no seal on a letter. She came at my steward Edric's summons, the same way she had come the 6 times before, quietly, without ceremony, wearing a plain gray traveling cloak with a fur hem that had seen better winters. Brennan had a cough. That was what Edric had written to her. Brennan, my great wolf, the silver and iron wolf I had run beside for 14 years, had developed a persistent cough. Low, rattling, concerning. Would she come? She came. I want to explain, before I go any further, how Brennan worked in the ordinary run of things, so that what I am about to tell you makes the proper weight of sense. Brennan was not a small wolf. He was not a gentle wolf, in the way that word is usually meant. He stood to my shoulder when he walked beside me, and he had not in the 11 years since my first Luna passed permitted a single healer, physician, servant, or ranking wolf to lay a hand on him without first showing their throat in submission. Even then he sometimes walked away. He was grief-made animal. That was how the old Monsieur Valdric had described him, 3 years after Saren died. Grief made into fur and bone and silence, walking in circles around a loss he could not speak. He had allowed Marin to touch him the first time she came. That had startled me so badly, I had knocked a candlestick off my desk. He had simply lowered his enormous head into her hands, and she had run her fingers along his jaw, along the ridge behind his ears, talking to him quietly in a voice too low for me to catch from across the room. He had made a sound I had not heard him make in 11 years. Not a growl, not a warning. The sound a wolf makes when it has finally been found. I had stood very still and told myself it was a professional thing. She was skilled. Animals trusted skilled healers. It meant nothing about the woman herself. That was visit 1. Visit 2, Brennan had developed a limp. Marin had come, pressed her hands along his foreleg, his shoulder, his hip, and then sat back on her heels and looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She had not said anything immediately. She had a way of sitting with silence that I found, against my considerable will, deeply comfortable, as though silence were simply a room she was at home in, and she was inviting you to come in and sit down. "I cannot find the injury," she had said at last. "But he is limping," I had said from my chair across the room, where I had been pretending to read dispatches. "I have seen it." "I know," she said. "He limped coming in. He is not limping now." We both looked at Brennan. He looked back at us with an expression of pure, guileless interest, the way a wolf looks when it is waiting to see which direction dinner will come from. "Wolves sometimes carry pain in strange ways," Marin said carefully. "It may come and go. I would not want to dismiss it. Perhaps I might come back in a few days, if the limp returns." I said yes. I said yes more quickly than was dignified for an alpha king, and then I went back to pretending to read dispatches. That had been visit 2. Visit 3, Brennan had gone off his food. Marin had checked his teeth, his tongue, the glands along his throat. She had asked me with the same unhurried patience she brought to all things what he had eaten in the last 3 days, how much he usually ate, whether anything in the hold had changed. She had a small leather notebook in which she wrote things, and she wrote very deliberately, her head bent, the candlelight catching the edge of her jaw. Nothing was wrong with his teeth. His glands were fine. His tongue was a perfectly healthy pink. She had looked at Brennan for a long moment. Brennan had looked back at her. Then he had, without preamble, pushed his head under her hand. "I wonder," she said very quietly, "if he is perhaps lonely." "He has the full pack," I said. "He has 20 wolves in the yard." "Yes," she said, "I know." She did not say anything else. She wrote something in her notebook, closed it, and told me she would come back the following week. She suggested, gently, that he might benefit from more varied company. She looked at me when she said it, and then she looked at Brennan, and there was something in her expression I could not quite read, a small contained warmth, like a lamp behind thick glass. I told Edric to put her in the south guest chamber, the one with the better hearth. She had been sleeping in the cold wing. I told myself it was courtesy, nothing more. That was visit 3. I will not catalogue every visit in the same detail, because some of what I remember is too close to the bone to lay out plainly, and because the shape of it is already clear enough. Visit 4, Brennan had been scratching at his left ear. Marin had investigated with full seriousness, found nothing, and emerged from the examination with an expression of perfect neutrality while Brennan wagged his tail. Visit 5, his coat had developed a dull patch near his left shoulder, resolved by the morning after Marin's arrival, which she informed me of with a level look I was only beginning to learn to read. Visit 6, he had been restless through the nights, pacing the corridor outside my study, making low sounds that Edric described as distressed. I had come upon them once, at a late hour, Marin sitting against the cold stone wall of the corridor, Brennan pressed against her side, her hand moving steadily along his flank while his breathing settled. I had gone back to my study and sat down at my desk and stared at the dispatches for a long time without reading a single line. The resonance had been very clear that night, running through the stone of the corridor and the cold air and the low sound of his settling. I had not known what to call it. I had not tried. Some part of me had been afraid to. Every time Marin came, she found nothing seriously wrong. Every time she prepared to leave, Brennan produced a new symptom within 48 hours. I want to be clear. I did not understand what was happening. That is not something I say easily. I'm a king, and kings are supposed to see the shapes of things clearly. My council credits me with considerable perception. My border commanders say I read a campaign before it declares itself. What I apparently cannot do is look at my own wolf manufacturing a series of fraudulent medical complaints in order to keep a particular woman in my hold, and draw the obvious conclusion. I will offer myself this one small defense. I had not, in 11 years, permitted myself to think of any woman in that way. The thought was simply not a thought I was in the habit of having. It had no well-worn path in my mind. It arrived nowhere because I had long since bricked the door. So I watched Brennan limp. I watched him scratch. I watched him go off his food and pace at night and hold his head at a peculiar angle that worried Edric. And I summoned Marin each time because what else was I to do? He was my wolf. My great wolf, my shadow for 14 years. The last living thread to a part of my life I carried the way you carry a scar, with care and constant awareness, and a settled acceptance that it would never fully stop pulling. I could not leave him to suffer. Except that, as it turned out, he was not suffering at all. The morning she arrived for the 7th visit, I went down to the eastern courtyard to meet her at the gate, which I had not done for any of the previous 6 visits. Edric had raised an eyebrow at me on my way past. I had told him I was inspecting the stonework on the east wall, which was a lie so thin you could have read dispatches through it, and Edric had the grace to say nothing. She came through the gate with her small bag and her gray cloak and the unhurried walk she had, like someone who had long since made peace with the distance between where she was and where she was going. She saw me and stopped. A small pause, not startled, exactly, more as though she was recalibrating. "My lord," she said. "Marin," I said. I had used her name 3 visits ago, the first time, and she had gone very still for a moment, the way a flame goes still before it steadies. Then she had said, with that quiet composure she kept about her like a second cloak, "Yes, my lord." And that had been that. Brennan is inside, I said. Edric will take you up. He has apparently been. I stopped because I was about to say distressed, and saying it aloud in the cold morning air of the eastern courtyard suddenly felt, for reasons I could not have fully articulated, both true and untrue and exhausting. Come in, I said instead. There is warm bread in the hall. She looked at me for a moment. She had gray eyes, not the flat gray of winter sky, but the gray of river water in early morning, when there is some color underneath that you cannot quite name. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a little less, with a face that did not perform anything. What she felt, you saw. What she did not feel, she did not pretend to. Thank you, she said, and came inside. Brennan was in my study. He was lying along the great hearthrug with his paws extended and his eyes half closed, the portrait of a wolf in genuine distress. He had been, according to Edric's morning report, making low sounds again, worrying sounds. Edric had been concerned. Marin set her bag down and looked at Brennan for a long moment before she crossed to him. He lifted his head when she came near. His tail moved once, a single slow wave, the way a flag moves when the wind is almost still. She put her hands on either side of his great jaw and tipped his face gently toward her. She looked at his eyes. She ran her hands along his throat, feeling the glands. She pressed carefully along his chest and his shoulders. She was thorough. She was always thorough, and she worked in silence while I stood by the desk and watched and told myself I was only watching because this was my wolf in my study, and I had every right to be present. She sat back on her heels. There was a pause, a long one by her standards. She was looking at Brennan, and Brennan was looking at her, and something was happening between the two of them that I had the peculiar sensation of watching from outside a lit window. Then Marin said quietly, "He is perfectly healthy." "He has been making sounds," I said. Edric described them as. I know what Edric described. She did not look up from Brennan. "My lord, I have come 7 times. I have found a limp that did not exist, a cough that resolved itself before I arrived, a dulling of the coat that I attributed to diet and that was gone on my next visit. I have found nothing wrong with his teeth, his glands, his joints, his eyes, or his appetite." She paused. "His appetite, I should note, is entirely fine this morning. He ate the full rack of venison Edric left by the south door." Silence. "He ate it before I came into the courtyard," she said. More silence. I looked at Brennan. Brennan looked back at me with the complete and magnificent serenity of a wolf who has never, not for a single moment of his long and excellent life, done anything wrong. "You are telling me," I said slowly, "that my wolf has been scheming," she said, simply and plainly as though it were a diagnosis. "Yes, my lord, I believe that is the correct word." I sat down in my chair, not in a kingly way, in the way a man sits when the floor has suddenly changed character without warning. Brennan stretched out his paws, sighed contentedly, and put his head down on the hearthrug. "I owe you," I said, "an enormous apology." "You did not know," she said. She had sat back on her heels, and now she rose and began to put her instruments back into her bag with the same deliberate care she brought to everything. "He is clever. I have met clever wolves before, but I think Brennan may be exceptional." "He is," I said. My voice came out somewhat flattened. "He is exceptional in a great many ways." I was not aware that manufacturing fraudulent medical emergencies was among his gifts. Something moved across her face. I caught the edge of it before she turned away, a warmth, a wanting to laugh, held in with the kind of practiced restraint that suggested she had spent a long time in rooms where her laughter was not always welcome. "You may laugh," I said. She glanced at me. "My lord, you are clearly trying not to. You have been trying not to on and off for approximately 4 of the last 7 visits. You may laugh." She looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled, not the small composed curve she offered the room in general, but a real one, unguarded, that reached her eyes and changed the whole quality of her face. And she laughed, soft and genuine and a little helpless, and the sound of it moved through my study like the first warm morning after a long cold, the kind you didn't realize you had been waiting for until it arrived. Brennan thumped his tail once. I watched him do it. Then I looked at Marin, who was still smiling, her hand resting lightly on the edge of my desk for balance as she laughed herself back to steadiness. And I thought, with a clarity that had no business arriving so suddenly and completely, I do not want her to leave. Not because Brennan would invent another ailment, though he would, without question, and I was going to have words with him about that at some point, when I could manage to be sufficiently stern, but because the room was different when she was in it. It had been different since the first visit, and I had filed that difference under professional skill and a pleasant change, and every other reasonable heading I could find, and none of them had quite held. The room was different because she was in it. That was the whole truth, plain and undecorated. She was composing herself, straightening, reaching for the clasp of her bag. "I should go," she said. "I am sorry for the wasted journey. I would not normally charge for." "Stay," I said. She stopped. I had not planned to say it. Or rather, I had thought about it in the careful, qualified way I thought about things I was not going to do, running it over in my mind to feel its edges, filing it away, returning to more sensible considerations. But it had come out of me direct and unqualified, the way the truth sometimes does when you are looking in a different direction, and your guard is not properly in place. "There is warm bread," I said, because some part of me was still trying to make this ordinary. "And I suspect my steward has prepared the south chamber again, out of habit. It would not trouble anyone if you stayed a few days." She looked at me. The gray eyes were quite clear, and there was something in them, a consideration, a weighing that told me she was not, under any circumstances, a woman who could be rushed. "My lord," she said carefully, "I have no wolf to tend." "No," I said, "you do not." "Then what would I be staying for?" I held her gaze. Outside, the wind moved against the high window. The fire in the hearth settled with a quiet crack. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought we might find out." Another pause. Brennan had not moved, but his ears had swiveled forward in a way I recognized. He was listening with the intensity of someone who had invested considerable effort in this moment. Marin looked from me to Brennan, and then from Brennan back to me. "Your wolf is watching us," she said. "My wolf," I said, "is the reason we are having this conversation. I feel that entitles him to witness it." She considered that. Then she said, "All right, a few days." And she unclasped her bag and set it down again with the quiet finality of a decision made. Brennan made that sound again, the one from the first visit, the one I had not heard in 11 years. Not a growl, not a warning. The sound a wolf makes when something it has been searching for has at last been found. I did not say anything. I looked at my wolf, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time begin to move behind my ribs, uncertain, tender, new, like water waking under ice at the very first breath of spring. In the days that followed, I learned things about Marin the way you learn a landscape. Not all at once, not from a high vantage, but piece by piece as you move through it, and each piece changes what you understood before. She was from a small settlement 3 days east of Ashfin, a border village called Callow Fen, where the pack was small and old, and the wolves lived close to the houses, and the cold came early. She had grown up among wolves the way other children grow up among siblings, tumbling with the pups, watching the great elders sleep in the square, learning their sounds before she fully learned to read. Her gift for them was not something she had been taught. It was something she had simply always had, the way some people have perfect pitch or the ability to read a sky. She had been trained, formally, by an older healer named Ossian who traveled the same border routes. Ossian had been a quiet, methodical man who kept careful records, and had strong opinions about the correct treatment of cold weather joints and almost no opinions about anything else. He had died 3 winters ago, and Marin had taken on his roots and his notebook, and, she said, a conviction he had tried to instill in her for years that the wolves would tell you what was wrong if you listened the right way. He used to say, she told me, turning her cup slowly, that the trouble with most healers is that they arrive with an answer already in their hand. They look for the thing that fits the answer instead of reading what is actually there. The wolves know, she said. They always know. You only have to stop filling the room with what you expect to see. I thought about that for a while. It seemed to me to contain something more than wolf healing, but I kept that thought to myself, on the grounds that the obvious applications to my own recent history were too pointed to raise at supper. I hear them, she said, on the second evening, which we spent in the hall by the fire because I had asked her whether she would take supper there, and she had said yes in the way she said yes to things simply, without performance. Brennan was between us, which he had arranged himself without being invited, and we were both pretending this was the natural order of seating. Not words, but something under words. The intent, I suppose, what they are carrying. And Brennan, I said, what does he carry? She looked at the wolf. He looked back at her with that magnificent guilelessness. Satisfaction, she said, and I heard the warmth underneath the word. Considerable satisfaction. He ought to feel guilty, I said. He does not, she said, not even a little. I looked at Brennan. Brennan regarded me with the serenity of the entirely unbothered. I shook my head and looked into the fire and felt, despite myself, a warmth moving through my chest that I did not entirely try to stop. She asked me that evening about Saren. Not directly. She did not do things directly. She approached from the side, the way a healer approaches a wound that is still tender, testing first whether the ground will hold. She asked about the tapestry on the north wall, the one that showed the moon hunt, with 2 riders and the pair of wolves running below them. I saw her looking at it, and then she looked at me. My first Luna, I said. Saren, she has been gone 11 years. I know, she said. Edric told me. I am sorry. Don't be, I said, and then stopped because that was not what I meant. I mean, thank you. It was a long time ago. I have made a kind of peace with it. I looked at the tapestry. The rider on the right had Saren's riding posture, straight-backed, light-handed, fearless. The court artisan had caught it perfectly. Brennan took it harder than I did, I think, or at least differently. He and Saren had a bond that was unusual. They were very close. He still carries her, Marin said. I looked at her. Not as grief, she said, or not only as grief, more as a held place. A shape he has kept open. She was looking at Brennan now, not at me. I noticed it the first time I came. He has been keeping something clear all this time, as though he was waiting for the right thing to come and fill it. The fire settled. Brennan's breathing was slow and even. He chose you, I said quietly. The first time you came, he does not choose people. He has not chosen anyone since Saren. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said at last. Does that? I stopped. The question felt like stepping onto ice of uncertain thickness. Does it trouble you? She turned and looked at me with those gray eyes, and there was something in them, not alarm, not distance, but a careful, honest consideration that I was beginning to recognize as the way she moved through everything. No, she said, it doesn't trouble me. It makes me wonder what he knows that I don't. I had no answer for that. I turned back to the fire, and we sat in comfortable silence for a long while, and I found that the silence between us was the same as the silence she kept in her work, a room she was at home in, and she was inviting me to come and sit down. I stayed there, in the silence with her, longer than I had sat in quiet company in 11 years. My counsel had views about Marin's extended stay, as my counsel had views about everything. My second, a sharp-eyed man named Horik, who had served my father before me, and who expressed opinions the way a hammer expresses opinions about nails, came to me on her fourth day with his eyebrows arranged in the configuration that meant he was about to be tactful. "The wolf tender," he said. "Marin," I said. "Yes," said Horik. "She has been here several days." "She has," I said. "And Brennan's ailment has resolved itself," I said. Horik looked at me for a moment. "I see," he said, in the tone of a man who sees a great deal more than he is going to say. "And you intend to?" "I intend to mind my own business about it," I said, "and I suggest you do the same." Horik had the grace, after 23 years of service, to accept this with only the mildest visible opinion. He went away. He said nothing further about Marin to me directly, but I noticed that the south chamber was subsequently supplied with fresh candles and a better quality of fuel for the hearth, and that the kitchen had begun producing her preferred tea without being asked. Edric, when I thanked him for this, said only that a hold ran better when its people were comfortable, and that he had always found the east guest room arrangements somewhat inadequate. His expression was entirely neutral. His eyes were not. I gave up on managing it. The hold had made its own decision, the way holds do when they are old and know what they need. On the third day, a thing happened that I did not understand until later. She had been in the east garden, the one that had been Saren's garden, though I had not told her that, and I wondered sometimes if Brennan had communicated it in his own fashion, because she had gone there as though she had always known it was there. She was checking the herbs that grew along the south wall, the ones the pack healers sometimes used, and I had gone past on my way to the armory and seen her through the archway and stopped. She had been very still, not in the way of someone resting but in the way of someone listening. Her head was slightly tilted. Her hands were in the herb bed, but she was not working, she was holding still, and there was a look on her face I had not seen before. Not quite recognition. Something before recognition. Something at the edge of a word you cannot quite hear. Then Brennan had pushed his head against her hip, and she had startled slightly and looked down at him, and smiled and gone back to the herbs. I had gone on to the armory, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. That evening I asked her about it. Not directly. I had been spending time with a woman who did not do things directly, and some of it had apparently become contagious. I asked if she had found what she was looking for in the garden. She looked at me for a moment. "I wasn't looking for anything," she said. "I was listening." "To what?" "I'm not sure," she said. "There is a sound sometimes when I am here. I thought at first it was the wind. It is too regular for the wind." She turned her cup in her hands, a habit she had when she was thinking. "It's like a bell tone, very low, not quite a sound you hear with your ears. More like," she paused, searching, "like when you press your palm against a tree in a high wind and you feel the vibration rather than hearing it. It comes and goes. I cannot tell where it is from." I looked at her. Something was moving in my chest, that uncertain, tender thing, the water under the ice, but it was louder now. Less like movement and more like recognition. "It doesn't frighten you," I said. "No," she said simply. "It feels familiar. That is the strange thing. I cannot say I have heard it before, but it feels as though I have. The way a piece of music you were told about as a child feels familiar when you finally hear it played. You never heard it, and yet you know it." Brennan had come and put his head in her lap, and she was running her hand along his ear without looking down, the way you touch something that has become, without your noticing, as habitual as breathing. "Marin," I said, and then stopped. She looked up. I did not know how to say what was behind my ribs. 14 years of being an alpha king, of saying difficult things to difficult people in difficult rooms, and I sat in my own hall unable to find the sentence. The sensation was not unpleasant. It was more like standing at the edge of something vast and cold and lit, and knowing that stepping forward is the only honest move, and also that you will never be warm in the same ordinary way again. "Stay longer," I said at last. "Not a few days, longer than that." She was quiet for a moment, "My lord," she said. "Khan," I said, my name. The one only Saren had used, and before her my mother and no one since. It came out of me the way the word stay had come out in the study, unplanned, unguarded, true. She looked at me. Something moved in her face, and this time I could read it. Not the contained warmth behind thick glass. The warmth itself, clear and direct and unmistakable, like a lamp moved close. "Khan," she said, trying it. Quietly, as though it were something she was learning the weight of. Brennan did not move, but his tail, slow and certain, began to wave. It was not until the morning of her 5th day that I understood the bell she had been hearing. I had come to know it by then, that low resonance, that vibration more than sound. I had been feeling it for years, on and off, in the deep part of the night, in the quiet moments between council meetings when the hall was still, and there was nothing requiring my attention. I had attributed it to the old bones of the hold. Ashfin was 400 years old, and its stones had their own voice. I had not questioned it. I had only known each time that it made the silence easier. I had been in the North Corridor when it came to me. A rush of clarity so sudden and complete that I stopped walking mid-stride and stood there, one hand against the cold stone wall, like a man who has just remembered something vital that he set down 11 years ago and has been half looking for ever since. The bond. The word arrived in my mind, with the weight of something that had been waiting a very long time to be said aloud. I am a king who was taught to read signs. My mother, a gifted woman who had understood things about the pack bonds that most alphas took generations to learn, had spent years trying to teach me what she called the patience of recognition, the willingness to sit with what you did not yet understand until understanding came, rather than reaching for an explanation before the thing had fully declared itself. I had been a poor student of that particular lesson. I was not, by nature, a patient man. I moved quickly and I decided quickly, and I had spent most of my life confident that I could afford to, because I was generally right. I had not been right about the resonance. I had not been right, it seemed, about a great many things. I had not made the connection until the morning I walked into the East Garden and found her there again, very still, and heard the resonance as clearly as I had ever heard it, and understood, with a certainty that landed in me like a key in a lock that has been waiting, without either knowing it, for a very long time, that the sound was not the stones of Ashfin. The sound was her. Or rather, the sound was what ran between us, the bond. I stood in the arch of the East Garden and looked at her, and the resonance rang through me, clear and low and old as the moon, and I thought, of course it was always this. Of course Brennan knew first, the way Brennan had known Saren. Wolves feel the bond before their alphas do, sometimes in the same way animals feel the change in the air before the storm. He had been carrying a held-open space for 11 years, and when she walked through my gate for the first time, some part of him had known. Some part of him had said, "There, that is the one." And he had done what he could to make sure I did not let her leave before I understood. He had done it with fraudulent limps and invented coughs, and a degree of theatrical suffering that I still found, even now, fundamentally mortifying. And yet, she heard me coming and turned, and the morning light was on her face, and the resonance rang through my chest like the sustained note of a bell, and I thought, I owe that impossible wolf a great deal. "You heard it again," I said. She looked at me. "Yes," she said, "more clearly this morning." "I know what it is," I said. She was very still. I walked to her slowly, because she deserved deliberateness, because nothing I was about to say should feel rushed or uncertain, because she was not a woman to be startled into anything, and I would not have her startled into this. I stopped when I was close enough to see the detail of her expression, the careful attention, the held stillness, the gray eyes watching me with the same honest weighing she brought to everything. "The bond," I said. "It is the fated bond, Marin. I believe, I am almost certain that you are my fated mate." She was quiet for a very long time. The wind moved through the herb bed. Brennan was, I realized, sitting 3 feet behind her because of course he was. The ringing, she said. I have heard it since I first came here. I have heard it for years, I said. I did not know what it was. I thought it was the stones of the hold. Something flickered across her face, that wanting-to-laugh expression I had been learning to read. You thought a 400-year-old building was singing to you. I thought it had character, I said. I am a king. I have lived in this hold my whole life. I did not feel it was beyond the realm of possibility. She did laugh at that, the real laugh, unguarded, the one that changed the whole quality of her face. And then the laugh softened into something quieter, and she looked at me with the lamp warmth clear in her eyes, and she said, I am not a noble woman. I have no pack, no title, no. None of that is what I need, I said, and none of it is what the bond cares about. Brennan has been scheming, she said. He has been scheming, I agreed, profoundly and without remorse. And you did not notice. I did not notice, I said. This is a failing I intend to spend some time feeling ashamed of. She turned and looked at the wolf. Brennan looked back at her with his magnificent, unassailable dignity. He knew, she said. Before either of us. He knew before either of us, I said. He is the reason you are standing here. If left to my own devices, I expect I would have needed at least another year. At least, she agreed. Marin, I said. She turned back to me. I am asking you, clearly and without any of Brennan's methods, I said, to stay. Not a few days, not a few weeks. I am asking you to stay and to learn what this is, and to allow me to learn it alongside you. I am not asking anything of you that you have not freely chosen. I am only asking that you give it the time it deserves. She looked at me for a long moment. I watched her weigh it, not reluctantly, but with the same honesty she brought to everything. She had a right to weigh it. She was not a woman to be swept into a destiny she had not examined. She was a woman who laid her hands on things carefully and learned what they were before she judged them. Then she said, I have never been asked before. Asked what? I said. Anything, by anyone who meant it in the way I think you mean it. She held my gaze. My Lord Khan, I will stay. The resonance rang through me, clear and whole and warm, and Brennan rose behind her and walked between us, and then sat down beside her in a way that left no ambiguity at all about whose wolf he had already decided she was. In the weeks that followed, I learned what it was to be changed gradually by a person who does not try to change you. Marin moved through Ashford the way she moved through everything, without announcement, without hurry, placing her attention where it was needed and her quiet where it was welcome. She was in my study some mornings, reading at the second chair by the window, the one that had been empty for 11 years. I found I did not mind the not minding, and that was a thing worth noting. She was in the East Garden. She was in the wolf yard, where the pack's younger wolves had decided, within her first week of true residency, that she was their particular friend in business, and followed her in a manner that my packmaster Jervin described as unprecedented and my counsel described as an omen, and that I described privately to no one as exactly right, exactly correct, exactly what I would have hoped for if I had been the kind of man who knew to hope for it. She was with Brennan always. He slept across the threshold of the south chamber every night, which I was officially neutral about. In the morning she brought him what he most liked to eat, which she had determined with scientific precision, and some creative experimentation involving venison cuts and dried fish, and a particular root from the eastern marshes that Brennan felt strongly about in a positive way. She knew his moods the way she had always known them, and she talked to him in the low, unhurried voice I had spent 6 visits failing to overhear, and he listened with the devoted attention of someone for whom this was the primary business of his day. I was not jealous of my wolf. I want that stated clearly, I was not. I was, however, aware of a very strong desire to be in the same room. She began, gradually, to be present at small things I had not expected. She was there the morning I received the boarder report from Aldrich, sitting at the second chair with her notebook, not attending to me, but there, the way a fire is there, making the room warmer without announcing that it is doing so. She was there when the 2 new pups arrived in early winter, brought in by a pack rider who had found their mother at the edge of the northern wood, gone. She had taken them without hesitation, installed them in a basket by the southwing hearth, and spent 3 nights sitting with them in the way she sat with everything difficult, quietly, completely, without complaint. The pups survived. They thrived. By the end of the 2nd week, they were following her through the hold with the cheerful certainty of creatures who have decided the question of where they belong and feel no further need to discuss it. I watched all of this and said very little and felt, in the deep part of my chest, the resonance growing steadier, closer, not louder exactly, more present, more real, like a sound you had been half hearing from the next room that has now moved into the room where you are standing and you can feel it in your bones. My counsel noticed the change in me before I fully articulated it to myself. My boarder commander Aldrich said I was less grim in the mornings. My steward Edric said I was eating more, which was perhaps the most specific measure. Old Valdric the Moonseer, who came to Ashfin twice a year and said things that were always technically correct and often unwelcome, looked at me over his cup of tea one gray afternoon and said, "The hold has a different sound." "Wind patterns change seasonally," I said. Said Valdric, "I did not say the wind." He had known about the bond before I told him, or perhaps before I knew myself. That was Valdric's way. I told him everything eventually, on a cold morning, when the first snow came and Marin was in the east garden standing in it with her face up, eyes closed, catching flakes the way children do, and I was watching her from the study window in a way that was no longer pretending to be about anything else. Valdric listened. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Does she understand the bond's weight?" "She is learning it," I said, "as I am." "And she is willing." "She is," I said, freely, without persuasion. "Good," said Valdric. "Then there is nothing further to consider." He paused. "Except perhaps speaking to your wolf about his methods." "I have tried," I said. "He is unmoved." Valdric made a sound that was not quite a laugh but contained most of the same components. "Brennan," he said, "is never wrong. In 30 years of watching this hold, he has never once been wrong. What he knows down to the bone." I did not argue with that. I had stopped arguing with that particular truth the morning in the East Garden, when the resonance had rung through me, and I had understood that it had always been running, just under the threshold of what I could name, the sound of something true, waiting to be heard. The night I gave Marin my mark was the first snow moon of early winter, when the sky over Ashfin went clear and cold and white bright, the way it does when the moon is so full that the snow below it seems lit from underneath. I had not planned an occasion. Marin was not a woman for occasions, and I had been learning slowly to match my pace to hers, which was to say, to trust the thing itself rather than the ceremony around it. We had been in the hall. We had been talking about the young wolf Petra, who had a tendency to favor her right hind leg in cold weather, and whom Marin was monitoring with the thoroughness she brought to all her patients. We had moved, without planning it, to standing side by side at the tall hall window, looking out at the snow and the moon. And I had said quietly, "Marin, I want to give you my mark." She had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what that means." I had told her, all of it, what the mark was, what it bound, what it meant in the eyes of the pack and the eyes of the law and the eyes of the bond itself. I told her without embellishment, without pressure, because she deserved the full weight and the full choice and nothing else. She listened. She turned her cup in her hands. She looked out at the snow. I watched her face while she thought. It was not an anxious face, nor a calculating one. She was simply being honest with herself in the way she was honest about everything else, and I was grateful for it. I had known women who would have answered immediately from eagerness or from politeness, and I had not wanted either. I had wanted this, the real answer, thought through to its edges, freely arrived at. She asked me, while she thought, how the old Monsieur Valdric had described the bond to me when I was young. I told her what I remembered, that the fated bond was not a thing that completed you exactly, which was a misunderstanding of it, that you were already complete without it, and the bond did not fix what was broken but rather found the resonance that already existed between two people and named it, and made it permanent and made it mutual, that you were still yourself, entirely, and so was she. Only the sound between you changed, deepened, became named, became something you could carry and know and return to. Like a tuning, she said. Yes, I said, like that. She was quiet a little longer, then she said, will it hurt? A moment, I said, and then no, the opposite, I think. The opposite, she said. Like setting a bone that has been held wrong, I said. A sharp moment and then a settling, a relief. She considered that, and you, she said, you will carry it too. I already do, I said. I have for some time, you can likely hear it. She looked at me then, and I saw in her face the thing I had been watching grow since her first visit, that clear, unguarded warmth. The lamp moved fully close, and she said, yes, I can hear it. I have been hearing it since the beginning. I thought it was the hold. It is not the hold, I said. No, she said, it is not the hold. I lifted my wrist. She looked at it for a moment, at the faint silver tracing that had been there for 11 years, the ghost of a bond that had not yet found its other end, waiting with the same patient certainty that Brennan had been keeping in his held-open space. Then she laid her wrist beside mine. The resonance rang through me, high and clear and whole, like a bell struck once and left to sound into the absolute silence of a winter night. I felt her take a breath beside me, and then the mark settled into both of us, warm, certain, nothing like pain and everything like the relief I had promised, and the snow outside the window seemed, for a moment, to be lit not from the moon but from something much closer. Brennan, who had been lying by the fire in a way that I can only describe as strategically positioned, lifted his head. He looked at Marin. He looked at me. Then he put his head down again, and sighed with the profound satisfaction of a wolf who has, at considerable personal effort and creative sacrifice, brought something to its right and proper conclusion. I looked at Marin. She was looking at her wrist, at the silver tracing now moving there, and her face was entirely itself. Open, honest, warm, no glass between the lamp and the room. How do you feel? I said. The ringing has changed, she said. She turned her hand in the moonlight. It is steadier. It is, she paused, searching for the word. It is home. That is what it sounds like. It sounds like home. I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into it, and the two of us stood at the tall window of Ashfin Hold and looked out at the snow and the moon, and the bond rang between us, quiet and full and entirely certain. Outside in the yard, I heard the pack wolves stir, not in alarm, but in the low, collective sound a pack makes when something is settled, when the question that has been running at the edge of everything finally has its answer. A single sound, as if all of them had exhaled at once, and then quiet. Ashfin had been waiting too. There are things I know now, about what it is to come back to something you had sealed off, and find it larger than you remembered. I know that it is not the same as the first time. It cannot be, and asking it to be would be asking the wrong question. Saren was the first, and she is still in the tapestry on the north wall, and she is still in the weight that Brennan carries, and I would not unmake any of it even if I could. But grief, I have come to understand, is not a door that closes. It is a room you live with, that gets easier to walk past with time, and that teaches you, if you are paying attention, what it is you are most afraid to lose. What I was most afraid to lose was this. This exact quality of life, the fire in the hall, the quiet company, the wolf between us on the hearthrug, the sound of someone's voice saying a thing they mean. I had been afraid to want it because wanting is the vulnerability that makes loss possible. And so I had not wanted, had not reached, had sealed the door and told myself I had made peace. It was Brennan who would not permit the peace. I think about that sometimes, in the way that you turn a remarkable thing over in your hands, examining its facets. An enormous silver wolf, 400 pounds of grief-made animal, who watched me seal myself for 11 years and then, with all the tactical ingenuity of a very old and very determined creature who had already been through one loss, and had no intention of watching me navigate another needless one, decided to take matters into his own enormous, fraudulent paws. The cough that resolved itself, the limp that wasn't there, the appetite that returned the moment Marin had confirmed it was absent. 7 visits, 7 manufactured reasons, one very patient traveling wolf tender who had been hearing the bell tone from the beginning and had not known what to call it until I told her. I owe Brennan a great deal. I have not told him this directly, because I will not give him the satisfaction, and because he already knows, and because the expression of a wolf who knows he is owed a great deal is quite similar to the expression of a wolf manufacturing a limp, and I cannot currently tell them apart. What I have done is this: the Tuesday rounds, which Marin and I began in early winter and which have become, without either of us formally naming them as such, the cornerstone of the week. She tends the wolves, the young ones in the yard, old Petra with her cold-weather leg, the 2 pups that arrived in late autumn and have decided that Marin is their second mother. And I walk the rounds with her, which I had not done since Sarin, and which I find is one of the best hours of my week. Brennan walks with us. He is, I have noticed, entirely healthy on Tuesdays. On other days he limps occasionally, and Marin gives him a look that contains within it an entire conversation, and he returns the look with the expression of an old wolf who has already explained himself sufficiently and does not feel the point requires revisiting. I have stopped trying to correct him. There are battles worth having and battles worth letting a wolf win, and I have decided, in the interest of my own equanimity and Marin's amusement, to let him have this one. There is a practical benefit in any case. The limp always falls on a day when Marin has been talking about leaving for the border settlements to check on the small packs there, and Brennan's limp always requires her to stay one more day, and one more day is, in my considerable experience, always worth having. I discussed this with Brennan once. I asked him if he intended to do this indefinitely, to manage the question of whether his fated mate through proxy came and went by means of ongoing theatrical suffering. He looked at me with those great amber eyes and said nothing, because he is a wolf and wolves do not speak, but the look contained everything. I could hear in it what Marin would have called an intent, a carried weight, the thing underneath the thing. The thing underneath the thing was, yes, indefinitely, this is what I am for. I accepted that. I was a king who had been brought back to his own life by a wolf's stubborn refusal to let me stay sealed, and I did not have, in good conscience, any complaint about the methods. I have thought sometimes about what Ossian, Marin's old teacher, had said, that most healers arrive with an answer already in their hand and look for the thing that fits it. That the trouble is not with what they know, but with the certainty they carry before they look. I had been the same. I had had my answer already in my hand, that I was a man who had his Luna and lost her and had finished with that part of his life, and that was reasonable and settled and nothing to revisit. I had walked through 11 years with that answer in my hand and looked at everything through it. Brennan had knocked it out of my grip the only way he knew how, which was to manufacture a situation compelling enough that I had no choice but to look at the actual thing in front of me. The actual thing in front of me had gray eyes and a notebook and an absolute gift for sitting in silence. The actual thing in front of me had been hearing a bell tone since the first morning she walked through my gate, and had almost left anyway, because she was the kind of woman who was honest with herself, who would not mistake a beautiful feeling for a wise one, who would not stay where she had not been truly asked. I had asked her, truly, without Brennan's methods, without ceremony or pressure, with only the honest admission that I did not know what we were finding, but I wanted to find it. She had stayed. I remember the last thing Marin said to me on the night of the snow moon, after we had come away from the window, and the fire had burned low, and Brennan had relocated himself to the threshold of the south chamber, with the quiet authority of someone who knew how the rest of the night ought to look. She had turned to me in the dim, warm hall, the mark new on her wrist, and she had said, "You know, I did almost leave. The 7th time. I had already decided if nothing was truly wrong with him, I would tell you and I would go and not come back, because it was beginning to feel," she paused, looking for the word. "Complicated," she said at last. "I had been hearing the bell and I did not know what it was, and it seemed safer to be further from it." "What changed?" I said. She thought about it. "He ate the venison," she said, "before I even came through the gate. That was when I knew he had been lying, and I thought, well, a wolf who cares that much does not deserve to be left." She looked at Brennan. "And then I thought if the wolf cares that much, perhaps the man is worth looking at more carefully." I looked at her in the dim, warm hall and felt the bond ring between us, steady and whole, and without any ambiguity whatsoever. "Brennan," I said, "has better judgment than I have given him credit for." "He does," she said. "He knew from the beginning. He simply needed to make sure we were paying attention." We were paying attention now, both of us, fully and without reservation, and without any doors sealed against it. The bond rang like a bell between us, low and clear, and the snow lay quiet over the whole dark kingdom of Ashfin. And in the morning there would be warm bread in the hall and Petra to check on, and 2 new pups to see to, and a wolf on the threshold who would sleep there every night from now until the end of his long and excellent life, satisfied, without remorse, and never once limping on a Tuesday.